Hello and welcome to Exchanges for the final time in 2025. This is the end of season 3. It's been an absolute pleasure to bring these to you. And therefore, I wanted to get onto something that is a passion of mine, but particularly a passion for the expert that we've got onto there, and that is the future of regional Australia. We know at the moment that we have a housing crisis. We know at the moment that urban expansion cannot keep up with the population that we have. Not just that, the attraction to the regions is now seeing 2 out of every 5 of us wanting to move to the better outdoor lifestyle. So what do we need to do? How are we going to do that? And why is regional Australia so attractive to us moving forward? Liz Ritchie is the CEO of Australia Regional Institute, and for what she is so passionate about, the RAI is all about driving regional Australia forward, putting the voice into politics around how the region will be not just part and parcel with our future, but how it can be the sustaining movement that Australia needs to take to make sure that we continue to be the thriving economy, society and culture that we are. So without any further ado, here is Liz Ritchie for the final time of Exchanges in 2025. Liz Ritchie, welcome to Exchanges. You have got an incredible remit under what you do for the Regional Institute. I want to therefore let's start with that big point. What is your future aspirations for the regions? Because clearly on a country like Australia, 6th largest landmass on the planet, but only 0.5 of the population, the majority of Australians live in the cities. How do we look at regional Australia in a way that clearly will be not just attractive for now, but for the next century, because it will be the driving engine, in my view, about how Australia goes over the next century?
Thanks, Evan. Great to be with you and great to kick off with such an important and big question. Well, it probably won't surprise you or your listeners to know that we also agree. We believe that regional Australia will play an absolutely central role in this nation's future. And, you know, as a woman who grew up in country New South Wales and was told a very different story about the future of regional Australia, I feel incredibly excited to have witnessed what has occurred in the last 10 to 15 years in this regional renaissance, and the fact that I join you today from a beautiful part of this country, the Bega Valley region, where I now have the privilege of running my own think tank with a remote first model. So, you know, the way that we have changed as a nation is something that we could have only ever dreamt about back when I was a youngster growing up in Deniliquin. But when it comes to the big question, I mean, we believe that regional Australia will be at the centre of this nation's future. We need to look at not only the record movement that we've seen in this nation from capital cities to regional locations across the country. We also need to couple that movement with sentiment, with hearts and minds in this nation. And the hearts and minds are telling us that 2 in 5 city dwellers want to move to the regions. And we need to understand that if you just do the rough numbers on that, that is about 7 million people. Now, 7 million people are not going to move overnight. There are steps that need to happen. There is planning that needs to occur. But when you understand that as a society, we want to live and work in different ways, then we need to try to get in front of that. And this is where, as an institute, you know, we do a lot of this work. We do a lot of research and provide evidence and data and insights that can help advocate for better outcomes, better investment, better policy thinking, to ensure that the nation can be set up to embrace a larger population in regional Australia. Unfortunately,
because that's a broad topic, and I did give you a broad question to start with, but obviously immediately from my mind, it brings up 3 points to that. First and foremost is the housing question has got to be the first one. We know that the average household, according to the RBA, in the regions is about 2.4 per person per household. In the cities, it's 2.8. The housing is coming. The second question for you is the jobs that needs to come in the regions to attract people there, and then the infrastructure. So from your view about that 7 million people that want to move to the regions, but needs to have those three things as an attraction, what is being done to move the jobs of tomorrow, the infrastructure of tomorrow, and the housing of tomorrow into the areas now people clearly want to be, which is somewhere like you, which is in Bega or whatever part of the beautiful regional parts we have in this country is moving forward.
Yeah, and you've raised three really important points. So, housing, look, we've tracked housing over a good number of years, and there's some really interesting facts about what is and isn't happening in the regional housing market. First and foremost, population growth is outpacing the housing approvals. And this is not a new issue, Evan. This has actually been happening for more than 20 years. So our housing approvals are 20% less than they were 20 years ago. And when you think about the amount of resources going into better planning, better housing approval, better skilling and filling of those roles across the country, even the remote fleets that are being, driven around the country where they are unable to get that skill set. It's extraordinary that we're sitting here today and acknowledging that we're this far behind. So what that tells us is that, we aren't doing the population planning well. And when you do the population planning well, you have the opportunity to cascade down what's needed when population grows. So obviously housing is a prerequisite, but also jobs are needed. Now, this is good news because we have jobs. We have currently over 70,000 jobs vacant across regional Australia, and they're just the advertised jobs. So you could easily, anecdotally, double that number, and that would be the kind of level of jobs that are available. And it's not just any jobs, it's a whole range of jobs. The majority of employment available across regional Australia are in what we call high skilled jobs. So it doesn't mean we don't need the low and medium skill, we need all of them. But the majority of the employment available to a potential mover could very well be in their professional sphere as an engineer, as a physio, as a teacher, as a nurse, as a doctor, all those critical skills that we need across this country. Coming back to housing, we also know that in regional Australia, the housing market is dominated by detached housing. So 80%, in fact, just over 81% of the houses in the regions are detached housing. This is historical because this is what was always once the case. What's
What
happened
take
in
it
this
first?
dramatic change that we've seen in this country is that people don't want those large houses. You've just mentioned, how many people per capita, live in a house in
Yep.
regions versus city. And that has been an enormous change. I grew up in a house. I was one of 6 kids. I don't know about you, Evan, but we had larger families back in the day.
Yep.
We needed those larger homes. And whereas today, younger people moving into the regions, older people downsizing, all sorts of walks of life making their home in regional Australia. They're looking for apartments, they're looking for townhouses, they're looking for mixed, medium, low density. We've got, a whole range of housing options available to us. But this is when it gets complex because in regional Australia, we don't necessarily have the skills in the construction sector to build the variety of housing that we need, the variety of housing that you might get in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, because it's a different accreditation, different licensing that's required once you go over a 3-story apartment building. And so you
Okay,
start to get into
apologies,
all
Chris.
the
I'm gonna come in over you
complexity.
again 'cause this is the fascinating thing, right? So I wanna get to that because you've talked about productivity there, which is something that I'm absolutely really strong on. But I just wanna go back a little bit also about the types of housing and the opportunity in the regions with the housing they have. One of the things that you and I have spoken about before when we first talked in August was the rental issues that's also facing regional Australia. The regional increase in rents is higher than it is in most capital cities, and the overall vacancy rates in renting in regional Australia is actually as bad, if not worse, than the cities. How do we address that problem as well? Because clearly people want to come, but if they can't get there because it's A, too expensive or it doesn't exist, then they can't move either.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So rental vacancy is a major concern, and it is worse on average. So on average, in our latest ambition report that we released back in October, it was sitting at about 1.7% versus 2% nationally. These are averages. It really varies. Now, this is, I guess, the most foundational point about a conversation with regard to regional Australia is that it is different in different locations. So regional Australia is far from homogenous. And so when we talk about these averages, we do need to be really careful that every location is different. However, across the board, we know that rental vacancies are incredibly tight in regional Australia. And this is something that, again, that I'm incredibly passionate about, because traditionally the housing market has been seen as a market for growth predominantly in capital cities. And then, you see the peaks and troughs in mining regions and other areas where there's sort of that boom and bust that can occur in the housing market. But traditionally, regional areas were not seen as a place for mum and dad investors to go and, purchase an asset and bring more stock into the regions. Now, I think that's changing. And this is our message to the viewers. We want mum and dad investors in regional Australia because it is a strong and solid investment, and it will continue to be into the future. And that is one of the ways in which we can continue to increase stock into the markets, in our regional markets that are crying out for rental housing. We know that it's a big move if you're moving from a capital city to just purchase a house and hope that that town fits you and your family and your lifestyle. We know that people like to try before they buy, and rental is really important when it comes to having that opportunity. So yeah, I'm in furious agreement. So one of the ways that we also increase stock comes back to this building and the construction sector and the skills that we have available to us. And this is going, there are so many wonderful organizations and local councils and government working. They're all working really hard on this. I mean, I would take my hat off for the, involvement and changes that the federal government have made in relation to housing. This was not their domain, and they have stepped into it in a very big way. I mean, there are an absolute suite of housing policies available. But one of the challenges with the housing policies as they sit today is that, from our perspective, there is not enough detail. And I guess the way we think about this is carving out funding for regional Australia. So it's one thing to have a big bucket of funding and the different policy levers that are used, whether it's for first home buyers, whether it's for social housing or more. What we have to see is allocated, carved out funding for regional Australia so that it reaches the right places, because otherwise it can have an effect that the funding gets dominated in capital cities, and this is what we see. So this is what we're trying to avoid. And that is one that comes back to planning, that comes back to being really aware of where do people want to move, where is the demand, where are the jobs, where's the big projects, where's the big infrastructure projects and the investment that's needed. So, Evan, we've been calling for a really solid national population and settlement plan for over 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
We've gone part of the way, and we're not alone in calling for this. We've many of our National Alliance members, such as Planning Institute of Australia, Regional Capitals Australia, organisations who know how significant this is, to get that plan. If we get that planning right, then we stand a much better chance in ensuring that we have, a plan for the future. We know where the population's going to be.
So then, on all of that, the next question that leads from it is infrastructure. So I completely agree with what you're saying about, there needs to be separation for the Housing Future Fund, et cetera, and that money that you're alluding to, the split out between, instead of it being for urban and rural, it should be therefore looked at in a separate way. Can I ask your view and your comments on, the regions that are actually starting to move? Are they the ones that are still within decent touching distance of the capital cities? Is it those that are, up in your direction in, central New South Wales sort of area that can get to Sydney inside an hour and a half or 2 hours on a train? Down where I am in Melbourne, where, you look out west and, you look at Ballarat, you look at Geelong and stuff, and the touch points that are there. Is that also part of where we need to make this discussion? Is that the infrastructure, particularly public transport or high speed public transport, is also part of the answer that you're talking about here? That it is not just about building and getting the building done for the individual; it's also about the region headline that needs to be done as well.
Absolutely. So when we talk about this population settlement plan, population's really the starting point. So what is the current population today, and what is it expected to be? Therefore, what are the wraparound requirements in both the soft and hard infrastructure
Yeah.
that underpin that growth? And so, that speaks to transport connectivity, it speaks to housing, it speaks to health, it speaks to education, childcare. I mean, I can go on. It speaks to what makes a good life,
Yep.
and can be mapped. It is a massive job. We realise this, but we're hoping to go part of the way in a research piece that we're doing this year that will provide a number of population scenarios, and so it'll be a really good starting piece, but it won't go the whole way. The government has done an urban policy plan that was completed last year, but again, there's more work to be done. It only looked at the top 20 cities. To your point about the growth areas, look, what you're really touching on there is, there's a whole domain around a subject called livability. And this is about connectivity in all forms. So you've touched on, is the highest population growth in those centres that are closer to capital cities? Traditionally, yes, there is good proximity to capitals in the areas that are growing at the highest rates. But there are also other areas, and I can use my region as an example, Bega Valley. It's 3 hours drive to Canberra, but it's 6 to Melbourne. 6 to Sydney, 7 to Melbourne. So you could say, that's not a close drive necessarily, but this is experiencing enormous growth because it's got an excellent airport. It is a beautiful place to live. It's got nature in abundance, employment opportunities, and in a way, it's still got affordable housing. Now, when you look at different parts of the country, people are looking for these aspects. They're going to be looking for, can I work from there? Do I have the opportunity to work remotely? If so, then I can work from most places, so long as we've got good connectivity. Or is there an opportunity for me to work in place? Is there housing available? That comes back to our earlier issue. Is there good connectivity? And that could be aviation connectivity. It could be other forms of trains and bus connectivity. Or is it a good distance for me to drive easily should I need to? But then it comes to those issues of education, health, childcare. I currently don't have a before school and after school care for my 8-year-old daughter. So, you have to make different arrangements. Things that people take for granted in the city are not necessarily available. We're about to come into the school holidays. There's not a school holiday program available. Now, if you lived in Canberra, as I have in the last 6 years, and there was no holiday program, the city would be in chaos. So there's all of these factors that make for a good life that regional Australians just find a workaround. We just find a way because
On
that's what
that,
we do.
because the
Mm.
question obviously comes, we've seen since the pandemic that there's been this sort of, regional Australia had its moment in the sun. The fact that, the attraction out of the cities was quite strong. It has led to incredible house price movements, and most, regional New South Wales, regional Queensland, regional South Australia, regional Western Australia are all at peak with regards to house prices. Victoria's inches away from their May 2022 peak. But the question that comes with what you've just talked about and the lifestyle and what have you is, you're talking about millennials. They're in that window that you're in with regards to age of kids. The same with me as well. Gen Zers are coming there at the same time. What is not to stop them from drifting back if they all of a sudden don't have that same opportunity that you're alluding to with regards to what is now seen as a pretty baseline service for lifestyle, which is, kids programs, kids education, and kids futures.
Yeah. Look, I mean, retention is always a factor. And we see this. And unfortunately, I think, you know, ensuring attraction is one piece and retention is another.
Mhm.
But if you think like we track this has been well tracked in international migrants because we have a really strong policy that we'd like to see double the amount of migrants living and working in regional Australia. And over the years, there's been a number of reports done to say, retention's not good. They come and they go for a whole range of reasons. But actually, when you get under the data, 70% of the migrants who move to regional Australia stay. And 70% in anyone's book is a pretty high number.
That's a big book.
So actually, what tends to happen is, the few difficult stories or the few stories that don't work out tend to get a little bit more coverage in a way than perhaps the good stories. And that's why we run a national campaign called Move to More. And on that website, you will see countless stories of people moving and how they've made it work and what made it a success for them. But I can tell you, I mean, it speaks to the spirit of regional Australians is that, they find a way and they make it work. And I hear many, many stories about people saying this is the best move I've ever made in my life, regardless of the downside, the fact that it's harder to get into a doctor, the childcare issues I've told you, they find a way because the lifestyle is so incredible. And this is why I'm so passionate about this being a sort of broader national policy, to see greater regionalisation, to see the country thriving, happier people, people with high levels of well-being. We know that regional Australians have higher levels of well-being than our city friends. And as a person who's lived in 3 or 4 capital cities in my career, they're beautiful. I mean, I love cities, don't get me wrong. But if I have my choice, I'm going to live in regional Australia every day of the week because I'm more productive. And I think, this is something that, it probably isn't well documented enough as it should be. I think that the challenges that we face they're not enough to make you think, oh, I can't make this work.
Yeah.
So I guess, the opportunities far outweigh the challenges. Let's put it that way.
So the final discussion then on all that is we right at the start sort of touched productivity, and you talked about regulation and the fact that, the regions and the regulation that you have in the regions is different from the cities, and, what you can and can't do infrastructure or building construction wise is a problem. Talk to me about what you would love to do to change that regulation that could move the dial relatively quickly for the regions in all of the things we've just discussed over the last 20 minutes.
Hmm. Look, that's a big question
Yes.
because I mean, we just touched on housing. There's regulation in every sector, Evan. But I mean, let's just talk about the skills. So, skills accreditation, and what are we doing to navigate the issues around skill mobility? In this country, we have jurisdictions, and we have many cross-border issues. Now, there's a lot of work being done currently to address that. I think that was actually a centerpiece of the Treasurer's Economic Reform Roundtable. So I think that there's work being done, but I guess all of these things take so much time, and that's where we get lost. That's where the productivity, fails us, because it takes so much time to change these laws and these regulations. But it's not to say the work's not being done. I guess it's just a question of how do you actually speed that up? How do you get more people skilled faster? And then how do you unlock the talent in the regions? So, in years gone by, in this discussion about, population leaving the regions, how do we attract people back to the regions? There was always an issue of the trailing spouse, this whole narrative about, oh, we can't move the family to the regions because only one of us will have a job. That has changed. We have unlocked. So technology is the biggest productivity gain that we have. And so I think it was a conversation we were having perhaps before we even started the on-air discussion, which is about the significance of investing in better connectivity and ensuring that places across regional Australia have the very, very best connectivity that they can have, because that will open up employment and it opens up new businesses. We see them every day, new businesses starting up. We partner with NBN on a program called Innovate NBN, and the programs that are being rolled out across this country because of technology, they're game changing, and they're helping to fill the gap. And I'll give you an example. The latest winner was called Raise Education, and they basically provide additional education support to kids in need across regional Australia. And this is a game changer because we don't have those additional skills and support on the ground. And this is one of the ways that we can intervene through technology that will help improve the education of our next generation. So technology and further investment is the key to unlocking productivity across regional Australia, but one of many.
One of many. Because, well, the next one then to move on to is the region. As I said at the start of this, Australia is the sixth largest landmass on the planet. Energy and energy sourcing. The region is going to be an absolute key part of that, considering our drive towards renewable energy. How do we help the regions not just embrace it, but make them champions for the use of their space that they have near their areas to improve the energy mix that we have, and to actually be, as I said, the hub for that drive going forward?
Yeah, again, a great question. So it's unfortunately it's one of these issues that's been highly politicized, and as is often the way, regional Australians felt very early on in this energy transition that they weren't being the decisions were being made to them rather than with them, and this has been a real problem, because if you think about the history of regional development in this country, one of the greatest asks or consistent requests from regional Australians is we want greater decision making power, we want more agency. And so when governments come in and impose decisions on their part of the world, which they are clearly very, very attached to, it is their life and their livelihood. It starts off the opportunity. The opportunity commences from the wrong standpoint. And so it's about rethinking how do we better engage with regional communities. Now, people will say a whole range of consultation has been undertaken, and this is true. We've got consultation fatigue, but it hasn't made it any clearer or It hasn't created a pathway where regions see themselves in the driver's seat. It hasn't created an opportunity where regions see that they are going to be the beneficiary of this large-scale transition. And what's sad about that is that I think they actually could be the beneficiary of this if the model was adopted or created in a different way from the outset. So they're sort of doing and learning as we're doing, and it's the cart before the horse in a way. And so one of our latest reports that we've recently released was towards net zero, building a social legacy. We've put up a new framework called the Real Deal, which is a regional energy and legacy deal. And this is really about changing the status quo and putting regional communities back in the driver's seat, and understanding that where there is private sector investment coming into regional locations, let's take the reses as an example, is that funding is pooled. And not only the private sector funding is pooled, but simultaneously, we believe that additional federal and state funding should also be pooled. And that funding can then be scaled to ensure that the growth plans and the aspirations that our regional communities have when they're in the driving seat can be achieved in those regional areas. Because right now, this energy transition is happening to them, and this is entirely the reason why we have this sort of really politicized issue. There are places across, New South Wales who have gone as far as to pool community benefit funds, but it's still not going all the way because they still make the decisions about where the funding goes. So what's really critical in this design, in the Real Deal, is that regional communities make the decisions about where the funding goes, because they're going to fight over land and land use every day of the week. But what will unite them is what is most important. And what will unite them are the things that you and I have been talking about, such as childcare, education, healthcare services, an upgrade to their hospital. In fact, if they don't have a hospital, an upgrade to their medical services, paying for doctors, ensuring more childcare centres are available or childcare options. There's a whole range of ways to fill those service and soft infrastructure needs in regional Australia. And regional communities are very good at designing these from a place-based perspective. They're incredibly creative. Just down the road, we have a medical practice that's owned by the community and owned and operated by volunteers, and they simply pay the GP to come in and be a GP rather than run the business. We want the skills to be used and their limited time and energy to be used where in the highest level of scope, which is to provide medical services. So the community find a way to run the business. And that's just one of many examples that we have across regional Australia where through their own innovation, they come up with the solutions. And this is what we will see if we give the money and the power and the agency back where it belongs to regional people.
I can't believe we've come to already the end of this half an hour. In fact, we were actually slightly over. So I will ask what I ask every single one of my guests when I conclude, which is, Liz Ritchie, if you're in charge for just one day, what would you do?
Well, I feel like we've covered a fair bit of ground about what I would do. What I would do, Evan, but I guess, what I would do is create a really strong national policy that would ensure that regionalisation is at the centre of Australia's future. So it would unlock the population and settlement plan that I have talked about, and it would embrace the steps that we need to take as a nation to ensure that, today we might be only 37% of the nation's population. But if you look out 20 years from now, we could be 45% of that population. Indeed, in 50 years, we could be 50% if we wanted it to be. And you have to ensure that there are steps taken to achieve a settlement pattern that looks like that. There are many benefits. We can talk to the agglomeration benefits, the productivity benefits. We know this internationally, that the nations that embrace second and third tier settlement patterns have higher levels of productivity. We know we've got a productivity challenge in this country. It doesn't need to be the domain of our capital cities. There is a win-win story here for the nation, and we just aren't embracing it. So that's what I would kickstart if I was in charge for the day. It would be a big piece of work.
But it would be a very, very valuable piece of work. Liz Ritchie, thank you so much for joining Exchanges.
Thank you, Evan.
Big thank to Liz. A great discussion. You can see her passion about the regions, and you can understand why so many people are so attracted to moving out of the big city and moving into the regions. To you out there as well, thank you so much for watching, listening, and doing whatever you do this year. It's been an absolute pleasure to bring Exchanges to you. Can't wait to do it in 2026. On that, don't forget, please like, subscribe, do whatever it is you need to do on this. We love having you as part of the community, and we really want to keep it going into 2026. There is an email, don't forget, it's exchanges@evanlucas.com.au if you've got any ideas, thoughts, or want to be part of the podcast itself. Until next year, have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Until then, take care.